It's hard to believe for most people, but these riots we've seen recently at the Capitol and the sudden bursts of anger and fury that seem kind of unattached from any sort of real sort of organization, these things can actually come out. They can emerge from random, uncoordinated nothingness. Hard to believe, but it's true. These protests at the United States Capitol recently, they were planned, set up, and took place in absolutely plain sight, as evidenced by the fact that the perpetrators have been easily caught by federal, state, and local authorities for their crimes, alleged crimes. The trials have not taken place yet. It's too early. But what's, I think, fascinating is that those most responsible for, fueling the flames, or maybe putting some logs on an already sizable fire, I don't think they can understand that they're responsible, that their actions and their rhetoric, their word choice, they were all responsible for the near assassination of, well, I guess it still could happen, of hundreds of American politicians and those who were there to protect them. And so it's important to understand that at its core, this near, and again, still potential tragedy, this tragedy that still could happen, was built on divisionary wording, rhetoric that undermined a belief in responsible government and the value, perhaps, of even democracy itself. And so it's important that we understand that all we saw from the Capitol protests came from something called emergence. And emergent events are kind of interesting because they're predictable, not predictable phenomena, stuff that happens that we can sort of predict and sort of can't. For instance, we can predict the start and the end, but what happens in between we can't really formulate. Now, of course, these are not guarantees, but we have a pretty good idea of how they work. The reasons that are driving the event and the reasons that stop the event, that quell the event, the phenomena, whatever we're talking about, whether it's Capitol protests or a food fight at an elementary school cafeteria, we can predict that. We know what will bound those kinds of events, what is its beginning and what is at its end. We can describe the rules of interaction while all the stuff is happening in between, but what we cannot predict is the precise flow of behaviors inside of the event actually occurring. And we're not quite sure where these events, these emergent events, will land. You can think of it as a flock of thousands and thousands of birds that use a couple of rules, up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, and a sense of gravity to form these massive structures in the sky where nobody is in control. And while humans do not fly, we do soar through social reality that is kind of conceptual, but nonetheless has real impacts on our everyday lives and on historical flows, where we're headed or not. And so, since we can't predict exactly how these things are going to go, but we can predict how they start, we can predict how they end, what we have to do is basically put our fingers, on a scale to determine whether it's going to be beautiful or brutal. Beautiful or brutal. And so this series of little talks I'm giving right now are about perhaps how we can understand what scale we're using and how we're moving either towards the brutal or the beautiful, and what we can do as individuals to hopefully make a choice to make a change, because one way or the other, a change is going to have to happen.